begin by simply thanking His Excellency, Mr. Chun-Ying, for joining this occasion, and also commending the students of Brown for this dialogue. It's, as you know, been a bit controversial in some quarters. I think it is a testimony to the free spirit of Brown's Chinese students that they want to have a dialogue on important matters with someone whose views they may or may not agree with. So I am very happy to welcome the former Chief Executive Officer of Hong Kong during a tumultuous period in Hong Kong's history, and now the Vice Chair of the National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. And I'm sorry I don't speak Cantonese, so I will call you Mr. Leung Chun-Ying. Your Excellency, thank you for joining this group. And I would invite you now to make a few opening remarks, and I believe the students will have some questions and comments to share with you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Freeman. Young people of Brown University and ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to join this dialogue. I'm very privileged to have Mr. Freeman, whom I admire over the years, as my moderator. And as I said to Joseph, rather than sort of just answering questions, I very much like to have a dialogue, an active dialogue with Mr. Freeman, so that I could also learn from him in the next 60 minutes or so. I just got back from Shanghai last night to join this Zoom event, so that I could be sitting in a proper setting in my former chief executive's office. What was I doing in Shanghai? I had two speeches, one to a group of mainland Chinese lawyers about their work in the Belt and Road countries, servicing the needs of Chinese enterprises in these countries. And then last night it was a dinner, high table dinner speech to Hong Kong University alumni. Hong Kong University, over probably about 20 years, has built up a population of nearly 10,000 alumni, most of whom are mainland Chinese residents studying MBAs and EMBAs, and the minority are Hong Kong residents who moved to various parts of the mainland. And so they were gathered, and I gave them a 30-minute speech on how Hong Kong could work with the rest of the country as it progresses towards further modernization.
I think that is a very important reminder that Hong Kong played an enormously important role in the recent modernization of China after reform and opening began in 1979 in December. Hong Kong and Chinese generally became the driving force in a lot of reforms in China, which have helped China to resume its wealth and power and become an important factor in the world. And I wonder, Your Excellency, as you assess the current situation of Hong Kong, many people abroad imagine that the one country, two systems arrangement for Hong Kong has somehow been altered. And yet Hong Kong does retain a very important separate identity within China, a different system. And I wonder how you see Hong Kong's future contributions to the development of China.
The fundamental value of Hong Kong to China, and by extension to the international community, lies in the fact that we practice, so to speak, the other system within the one country in accordance with the basic law. Now, one country, two systems, Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong with a high degree of autonomy, is no longer an abstract concept as it was perhaps in the early 1980s. It's been practiced. And in 1990, after 5 years of extensive consultation, both in Hong Kong and in the mainland, the Basic Law was promulgated by the Chinese National People's Congress. I was Secretary General of the Basic Law Consultative Committee in Hong Kong, which comprised 180 members drawn from all walks of life, including young students. And I was responsible for the two extensive, and so far, they were the most extensive constitution exercises in Hong Kong. So we came up with the first draft and the second draft, and then we wrote numerous reports to Beijing on how the Basic Law should be drafted. And so whether we talk about the high degree of autonomy or democracy in Hong Kong, these are not abstract concepts, and these have been defined in the Basic Law, which is a legal document. It is both Hong Kong law and national law of China. Let me just, if our audience, Mr. Freeman, has the patience of 1 minute, address the question of democracy in Hong Kong. Now, first of all, Hong Kong is not Singapore. It did not become a sovereign state at the end of British rule in 1997. It was returned to China. Its status is still a city. It is a special administrative region enjoying a high degree of autonomy, but nonetheless, it is a city. Local democracies in cities in America and in Europe have limitations. The power of the people in empowering the locally democratically elected governments is also limited. And so when people say we want democracy in Hong Kong and we don't want Beijing's participation in the process, that would lead to Hong Kong having a government and having a chief executive that have the kind of powers at the New York City government or the mayor of New York, ditto London, Paris, Tokyo. If Hong Kong wanted that, meaning chief executive and the Hong Kong government having the same kind of powers as the New York mayor and New York City government, then Beijing will probably say yes tomorrow. But Hong Kong doesn't want that. We want a high degree of autonomy. Where does this high degree of autonomy and the additional power come from? It's not the mandate of the local electorate. It's the additional mandate of Beijing. And so we can't cut Beijing off the process. So when people say we don't want to follow the Basic Law by having a nomination committee, and we don't want Beijing's appointment of the chief executive elect at the end of the electoral process, then that's de facto independence. So I think it is important to distinguish democracy and the democratic process in Hong Kong as a part of China, not as a sovereign state, attaining a high degree of autonomy.
Certainly the principle of one China is the basic premise on which two systems or two or more systems must be based in China. That is true. And I wonder, I was going to ask you, during your time as chief executive, there was, of course, a proposal for universal suffrage, which fell short of the demands of some people in Hong Kong, and there was quite a bit of turbulence over that issue. Looking back on that, because the proposal was not ultimately accepted and enacted, do you think things would have been different? Was that an opportunity that was lost in Hong Kong?
Sadly, I think the picture is becoming clearer and clearer looking back. And as they say, hindsight is 20/20 vision. I think we lost that opportunity during my 5 years as chief executive, and I took the baton and tried to sort of move forward and move towards the ultimate goal of having universal suffrage to elect the chief executive according to the provisions of the Basic Law. The Basic Law provides for this ultimate goal on the basis of nomination committee nominating the candidates for this chief executive position, and after election, as I said, appointment by the central government in Beijing. We lost that opportunity because essentially the young people's minds were hijacked by people who thought by twisting the arms of Beijing, by occupying Central for continuously 79 days, Central District of Hong Kong, for 79 days continuously, they could get something that's not provided for in the Basic Law. They wanted civic nomination, in Chinese, 公民提名必不可少. And they wanted civic nomination and nothing less instead of nomination committee nomination. I talked to some of the protesters who were sitting in the streets of Central District, and they did not know that this was written in black and white in the Basic Law, meaning nomination committee nomination. So we lost that opportunity, and I hope that one day we'll have that opportunity again and sit down with the people of Hong Kong and Beijing to agree on the way forward.
You've just been in Shanghai, which is, in some respects, a competitor of Hong Kong, as well as a partner. How do you see Hong Kong's role developing in the financial sector and otherwise in the future in relation to Shanghai?
It's a great question. Let me just cite one example. Shanghai is a huge shopping center in terms of the number of container boxes handled every year. And Hong Kong has lost that top position to Shanghai and has slipped to something like 8th or 9th place in the World League table. But I say to my friends in Shanghai and also in Hong Kong that Hong Kong is not just a shipping port. We are an international shipping services center, the way that London is. And London, as we all know, doesn't have a container terminal, doesn't have a seaport. But it's a highly successful shipping services center in the sale and leasing of ships, in the financing of ships, in the insurance of ships, and in the practice of maritime, including international maritime laws. And Hong Kong has been moving in that direction for at least 10 years now, in the 13th five-year plan, which came out, 8 years ago? And then in the 14th five-year plan, which came out 3 years ago, there was this a statement that says to support Hong Kong to elevate its position as an international financial, trade, and transportation. It's not just shipping, but transportation, meaning both sea and air, center. Now, the word elevation to me doesn't mean expansion, doing more of what we've been doing, namely moving container boxes around at container terminals. It means going up the value chain. And to me, that means sitting in offices instead of sitting at a port, preparing documents, doing insurance policies, loan documents, and legal documents. Now, Hong Kong has an advantage over Shanghai doing that. And instead of Hong Kong port competing with the Shanghai port, Hong Kong could complement the development of Shanghai as a huge container port by providing the services I mentioned, because Hong Kong is an international financial center and Hong Kong practices common law, etc. I mentioned this as an example to also underline for our young audience in the States, in the Brown University, that Hong Kong provides an attractive career path for them if they're interested in the services that I mentioned. Now, by the same token, if people are interested in international trade, other professional services, including legal services, financial services, etc., and Hong Kong is, I shouldn't say the place, but Hong Kong is definitely a very interesting and attractive place for young people to develop their career, particularly if they are young returnee graduates from great universities such as Brown.
How does this relate to the Greater Bay concept? The relationships with Shenzhen, with Zhuhai, with Auman, with other cities and clusters in this Pearl River Delta?
We have a great strategy going for Hong Kong. I have visited all the 9 Guangdong cities in the Greater Bay Area, the other 2 cities being Hong Kong, where I live, and Macau, Auman. I visited all these cities more than once, and I go to Nansha, which I helped to set up a Guangzhou-Nansha Consultative Committee on Guangdong-Hong Kong Cooperation. I'm an advisor to the committee now. This committee now has 14 working groups and has grown very quickly. It's the first government to business G2B consultative body modeled on the practice that we have in Hong Kong. We have numerous G2B consultative committees set up by the government in Hong Kong. And it's been working in the past 2 years extremely well. You only need to look at the names of these working groups and the number of it to understand why. Nansha is the geographically speaking the center of the Greater Bay Area, and by high-speed train, it's only 35 minutes away from Kowloon, which is within the urban area of Hong Kong, and you could easily do day trips. The State Council of China in Beijing issued a document on the 6th of June last year to give Nansha more privileges and flexibilities in achieving the goal of integration with other cities, including Hong Kong in the Greater Bay Area. And as an example, this is very interesting. We all know that personal income tax rates are higher on the mainland than in Hong Kong, which is known for its low tax rate. And in the Nansha plan now, a Hong Kong resident who works in Nansha will pay no more than what he would otherwise pay if he earned the same amount of salary in Hong Kong. And how do you define a Hong Kong resident? We put our heads together, and in the end, we decided to define Hong Kong resident rather liberally. For this purpose, a Hong Kong resident could be, for example, an American national who's employed by any Hong Kong registered company and therefore works with a work permit and therefore he has a Hong Kong temporary resident ID card. And despite the fact that he's not a permanent resident like myself and he's not a Chinese national like myself, if he works in Nansha, he gets that concessionary tax benefit, just to attract foreign talents to take up residence and work in Nansha, probably for foreign companies. Now, this is a good illustration of the way that the country is moving forward. I say this because I know that there are speculations in Western countries that China's closing its doors against China's open door policy and its reforms are moving backwards. Not true.
One question that I would like to turn this over to the students at Brown to conduct a dialogue with you, but before I do, if I may, one of the theories about the more recent unrest in Hong Kong had to do with housing and education problems, that the sense that perhaps they hadn't been adequately addressed in Hong Kong by comparison with, let's say, Singapore, which is a competitor with Hong Kong internationally, and where housing and education are, I think, quite admirably taken care of. Do you see the end of the unrest as enabling the new government in Hong Kong to address these questions? And in other words, I'm sort of asking you about the residents of Hong Kong rather than, the citizens of Hong Kong, rather than the foreign residents or others who may take advantage of all of the arrangements you've just discussed.
I understand that, Mr. Freeman. Shortage of housing and therefore the high cost of housing, which has become unaffordable to most of our young people, and also the way that we educate our young people in schools and universities are well-rehearsed issues. But I think the issues that we face and we need to sort out are more than that. The problem is a composite problem. Let me name one that is not discussed as often. And this is the fact that because of the economic structure of Hong Kong, we are 90-something% in terms of GDP contribution, service economy. And we have great engineering schools in 5 of our universities in Hong Kong. If you study aircraft engineering, aeronautical engineering, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, what would you end up doing at the end of your studies? You have a great degree from a great university in aircraft engineering, aeronautical engineering, and you need to retrain yourself into a real estate broker, a bank manager. We have very low unemployment rate amongst graduates, but that's just employment. That's not career. I don't think we're satisfying the career aspirations of young people. Now, at the same time, we have good demand for internationally trained engineers with all these engineering degrees in the mainland of China. And this little Shenzhen River has somehow become an insurmountable obstacle psychologically for the young people to cross. And I'm sure they find a great career in the mainland of China pursuing their dream. Mr. Freeman, there's this Chinese saying, 学有所成, meaning you succeed in what you study, what you learn, so you learned it. And there's another sentence right behind this one, is 学有所用, meaning you can actually practice what you have learned. Now, in Hong Kong, for most of our young graduates, they have done the first part. They learned what they set out to learn, but they are not able to apply what they have learned and build themselves a career that is set off to have, because Hong Kong's economic structure simply doesn't provide that. And this is something that I've been working on in the last 5 years, running up and down the country, and we now have all kinds of policies. For example, topping up the salaries that our Hong Kong graduates earn on the mainland in the GBA area, Greater Bay Area, to 18,000 Hong Kong dollars a month. And that's by way of government subsidy, Hong Kong government subsidy. So these are the things that we're doing. So we need to have a multi-pronged approach to tackling the problem that the young people in Hong Kong face, and therefore Hong Kong faces.
Do you think that the university system, the school system generally in Hong Kong, adequately prepares people to compete with the enormous number of very bright and energetic people who are over the border on the mainland?
I've asked this question, Mr. Freeman, of employers, not just Hong Kong employers, but foreign employers and mainland Chinese employers in the mainland. And they tell me, every one of them tell me that Hong Kong graduates are worth every penny they are paid because they have a broader international outlook. Generally speaking, the English language is better. And more importantly, Hong Kong people are more pragmatic. They are more, if you like, autonomous in carrying out the instructions of their superiors, and they do not sort of have to sort of go back to ask their superiors what to do by way of next step. Therefore, we now have 370,000 Hong Kong people who have taken up permanent residence in mainland China, and that's about 5% of our population.
In the spirit of self-startup, may I now ask the students at Brown if they have comments or questions they would like to propose to Your Excellency.
Thank you.
For moderating this panel. My name is Autumn, and I'm from Shenzhen. So to me, the relationship between Shenzhen and Hong Kong is quite crucial, especially considering from my personal career growth in the future. So I'm just wondering for Mr. Liu, what advice do you have for, let's say, Chinese international students to develop their career in or higher education in Hong Kong, and considering now compared to the past few years, now the borders being the travel restrictions are being lifted a little bit. So how do you see this as more attractive to international students to come to Hong Kong and then develop their life there? Yeah.
Thank you. I'm very fond of Shenzhen. It was the destination of my first trip to the mainland of China in 1977 after I returned to Hong Kong from my studies. And then from 1978 onwards, that was nearly the beginning of the reform and open door policy. I was invited by the Shenzhen government to go to Shenzhen to teach as a young graduate on basically market economy and how market economic forces shape and allocate the use of land. And together with a couple of other Hong Kong-based Hong Kong professionals, I helped plan the first city plan of Shenzhen with a target population of 300,000. And we had a good debate. We couldn't believe that Shenzhen would have a population of 300,000 because it was just at that time a small fishing and farming village. And today, as you know, has a population of over 20 million. And it is the city that has the highest GDP per capita, and it's very close to Hong Kong. Shenzhen is now more or less twinned with Hong Kong, but surely we practice the two different systems under the one country, two systems concept. Now, more specifically to your question, what I would like to see as a matter of government policies for both governments, and obviously the central government will have to be involved, they have to approve some of these propositions, is to allow the freer flow of, using an economic jargon, the factors of production, people, capital, data, which is important, and goods. And I've been working on this too. And if you follow government statements and news closely enough, I know it's not easy sitting in America. Even sitting in Hong Kong, we can't cover as fast as we should and as closely as we should. All this happening on the other side of the Shenzhen River. If you've been following this news, you realize that the border boundary between Hong Kong and Shenzhen has become more and more porous over the years. It's easier for people to cross over in both directions, easier for goods to cross in both directions, etc., etc. And I've been working on the flow, the freer flow of electronic data between Hong Kong and the GBA Guangdong cities. The two cities have very different economic contents. Hong Kong is a service economy. We are international oriented. Shenzhen is not. So once you look at these differences, you find areas of further collaboration between Hong Kong and Shenzhen. And it's now totally practicable nowadays for someone to live in Hong Kong and work in Shenzhen, and vice versa. And therefore, we now have seven or eight, we have a new one, boundary crossings. And these boundary crossings are the busiest in the world. So these two cities are being twinned. And a lot is going to happen. And I liken the kind of energy that could be released through closer collaboration between Hong Kong and Shenzhen to nuclear fusion in physics. You combine the two cities together, and both are pretty big. We have 7.3 million people, and there are over 20 million people. And I see a lot of opportunities, particularly for young people. And you have to look. If you're a mainland resident, Shenzhen resident, come to Hong Kong, spend a week in Hong Kong. If you're a Hong Kong resident, go to Shenzhen, spend a week in Shenzhen. Find out for yourself.
I see a hand or two raised in the audience. Joseph?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Leung and Mr. Freeman today. My question was, what do you think are the biggest changes that will happen in Hong Kong leading up to the handover in 2047 and post the handover?
Firstly, 2047 is no longer a milestone date in our calendar. None other than President Xi said that on the 1st of July last year, on the occasion of 25th anniversary of the establishment of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. The reason is very simple. The practice of one country, two systems is beneficial to both Hong Kong and the country as a whole, and there's no reason to change it. And so we don't talk about 2047 anymore. Changes, I think the biggest driving force behind the change of Hong Kong is the further opening up and reform of the mainland in China. And Hong Kong will have a bigger role to play in these opening up and reforms, both nationally and internationally. And so that's the macro thing. And on a slightly less macro level, the integration of Hong Kong economically and socially, not politically, because politically we'll retain a high degree of autonomy. The integration of Hong Kong economically and socially with the 9 cities in Guangdong that form the rest of the Greater Bay Area. We see a lot of new policies coming up. We see new infrastructure being completed. Something as simple as goods from Dongguan, which is a huge manufacturing base on the Guangdong side of the Greater Bay Area, being able to be transported by sea direct to the air side, not the land side, to the air side of Hong Kong airport, which is already the busiest international cargo terminal in the world, air cargo terminal in the world. That was announced a few months ago. It's not earth-shattering. I don't think it's hit some mainstream news in the United States. But for Hong Kong, as a very important international air cargo hub. And that's another big step forward. So these are the things that I think we need to follow. We simply don't have enough time in the 1 hour that we've been given to cover all this. And so my advice, Joseph, to you and to your colleagues in the States is to follow as much as you could announcements by the government and also news in China, particularly in Guangdong.
Joseph?
Thank you, Vice Chairman Leung. Thank you, Ambassador Freeman. My name is Wang Chongmo, and I'm just very glad and very happy that we are able to have this conversation. My question directed towards Your Excellency is perhaps in the light of your perspective on how there perhaps is a psychological barrier under the Shenzhen River. Me, myself, have lived in Shenzhen for a little more than a year. Maybe in a similar token, there is a barrier more on the cultural and political side between US and China. How do you see going forward, will this barrier be potentially broken? Or what are some of the things, not just students, but the two countries can do to better facilitate this conversation? Thank you very much.
I think the single most important thing that we should do is to encourage and facilitate more interaction between our peoples, between Americans and the Chinese, in America, in the mainland of China, and in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong would be a very good facilitator for that, because we are welcoming, we have entirely open doors. We love to have young people from America to spend time in Hong Kong to see for themselves what life in Hong Kong under one country, two systems is about, and then to hop over the Shenzhen River to go to Shenzhen, to Dongguan or Guangzhou to have a look-see. We now have a great university. It's Hong Kong University of Science and Technology Guangzhou, which is a joint effort between Hong Kong UST and the Guangzhou University in Nansha, 35 minutes by high-speed train from Hong Kong. And then from train station, it's about 7 minutes by taxi. Go and have a look-see. I have been proposing, and I think this could become a reality sooner than we think, to give Hong Kong permanent residents, regardless of foreign nationality, what I call a Greater Bay Area card. And the holder of this card, instead of using for example, American passport as a travel document on which you need to have a Chinese visa to go from Hong Kong to the mainland. You don't need a visa coming to Hong Kong, but you need a visa going from Hong Kong to the mainland on your US passport. But instead of your US passport, since you are already a permanent resident of Hong Kong, meaning you've lived in Hong Kong for 7 years or more continuously, ordinarily, and by the way, as an American national holding a Hong Kong permanent ID card, having lived in Hong Kong for 7 years or more, you are qualified to vote in our elections. Now, that's pretty unique in the world. But anyway, my proposal is for such nationals to have a travel pass, call it GBA card, for example, that you could use without having to have a visa. And so that you could sort of commute weekly or even daily to places like Shenzhen or Nansha to work or to study. Now, these are the things that I think should be on the card. They are on the card, and again, it's an illustration that underlines that China's continuing to push forward with its openness and reforms.
Joseph?
Your Excellency, I very much thank you for taking the time. As someone who is potentially interested in working in Hong Kong one day, I'm interested to hear what your what your thoughts are on your vision for Hong Kong going forward, and in a increasingly globalized world, how to stay competitive in the global landscape.
I could recommend to you the four hopes that President Xi stated in his speech to a 200-strong gathering of Hong Kong and Macau people. The delegation was in the Great Hall of the People in Beijing, and President Xi received them. It was the occasion of the 40th anniversary of China's reforms and open door policy. President Xi started by the way, it's on the 12th of November 2018, and you could find it, you could Google it, and Xinhua News Agency still carries the full text of the speech. President Xi started by going through the 6 contributions, 作用, functions of Hong Kong, Macau to the reform process and open door policy of the country. And then he stated 4 new hopes, 4个新的希望. These 4 new hopes all started with the word 更加积极主动, meaning Hong Kong, Macau should be more proactively and more positively to do what? 助力国家全面开放, to assist the country in the complete opening up of the country. The second one is to integrate with the development of the country. 更加积极主动涌入国家发展大局. The third one is even more interesting. It's about the governance. It's about the administration, the management of the country. 更加积极主动参与国家治理实践, participate in the governance, administration, management of the country. 参与国家治理实践. The fourth one, I think, could be very relevant to our Chinese young people in America. In America, in the Brown University. 更加积极主动促进国际人文交流, to promote international human-to-human exchanges. 人文, 文章的文. So I think this is what Hong Kong could do and do very well. Particularly if you are someone with a mainland background or someone with an American background. If you come and work in Hong Kong and you have the mainland of China, on the one hand, you have America and by extension, other countries in the world on the other, you could be a very effective personal super connector. And Hong Kong collectively, I've been saying this, is the super connector between the rest of China and the rest of the world. Now, I know it's a great deal to say this, but if you look at the second largest contributor to Hong Kong's GDP, which is our international trade services, is second only to financial services, which, as you know, is huge. We have 100,000 trading companies in Hong Kong, all very small, but very effective. And on average, each employs about 4 people. But our trade volume is about 3.3 times the size of our GDP. We are not a huge market destination, and we do not manufacture goods now to export. So when we talk about trade in Hong Kong, we don't just talk about import, export. We don't just talk about re-exports. We are a very big and very successful offshore trading center. We buy and sell. And we don't necessarily import when we buy. We don't necessarily export when we sell. We buy for other people. We sell for other people. Now, that's a good illustration of the super connecting role of Hong Kong as an international trading center. We're the biggest buyer of Japanese foods for 13 years in a row. And we just place the orders, and the goods go direct to the markets, mainly in the mainland China and Southeast Asia. We can't eat all these Japanese foods that we buy from Japan. So Hong Kong is a good soap connector, and ditto financial services. And we do a lot of soap connecting between different parties in the world.
All right, Chess. I believe we've time for one more question. Anyone in the audience would like to ask a question?
I think you have stunned them with your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Leung. I just have a question. I realize the Hong Kong government, beginning in 2022, has a lot of new policies to attract talent from the world to work and live in Hong Kong. They have published a lot of series of new visas for these talented people. How do you see Hong Kong's future policy regarding attracting talented youth, including people with mainland background and also other international peoples to brighten Hong Kong's future and compete with its major competitor, Singapore, in Asia with its financial centers?
One of the drawbacks of working and living in Hong Kong, particularly as you are an expatriate, whether an American expatriate or mainland Chinese expatriate, a young person living on your own in Hong Kong, is the cost of housing, because you don't have your family with you that provides a roof over your head, and cost of housing is high. But we are seeing increased supply in the pipeline. The housing production cycle in Hong Kong is long. We have to follow every step in the legal and planning process, which could be very tedious. And so some of the planning changes that took place during my term more than 5 years ago, and some of the sites that we created, some of the building construction works that we started in those years are now becoming new supply in the next couple of years. So I see an easing off of the situation. At the same time, I've been proposing that we should provide subsidized quarters for certain professions and disciplines, the people in which we want to attract from overseas, medical personnel, for example. I've been suggesting that we should build, for example, next door to Queen Mary Hospital on a greenfield site, quarters for doctors, nurses, and other health professionals and carers for patients in hospitals. We don't do that. It's difficult to attract doctors, nurses, etc. When they have to pay something like 40% of what they earn, despite the fact that salaries, generally speaking, are higher in Hong Kong to their landlords. So that's one thing that I think we should do as well, in addition to increasing supply, which has been increasing in the private housing sector.
Joseph, are there more questions?
Yeah, I believe that's time for today, actually. But I would like to again thank you to Mr. Leung and Mr. Freeman for coming over and taking your time. Hope you two had a great time as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joseph. And Mr. Freeman, thank you very much for moderating. As I said, very pleased to interact with you. I didn't have the opportunity to actually listen to your advice as to what we should do, but hopefully I'll be able to be in touch and even sort of shake your hands in person.
I will look forward to that, and I want to thank you very much. I don't know if the audience is aware that you flew from Shanghai to Shenzhen and then into Hong Kong in order to be up early in the morning in Hong Kong to do this. We thank you very much for your presence.
Thank you.
and for your remarks. And I would
And
like
I'm flying off to Fuzhou on a 1 o'clock flight today.
exactly. So I would also like to thank the Brown students for arranging this occasion for both of us. And thank you very much. And I will
Thank you very
now
much.
have a good day.
Bye-bye.